So with Wayfinder 1.0, I got back into the game, played some more Wingrave, and had a great time. This character is super easy to play, you get tons of healing, plenty of defensive options, and, if you charge up your ult, it's literal invulnerability. So, in my opinion, this is an extremely new player-friendly character. In fact, when you are playing Wingrave, for a lot of the game, the power level suggestion is exactly that, a suggestion. You can fight bosses that say they need a significantly higher power level and be totally fine. This gap does very much narrow as you approach the later endgame, with some of the harder end bosses definitely getting a little bit sketchy if you're undergeared. But so far, I've been able to take down all the bosses that I've encountered. I've had a lot of fun on Wingrave, and I finally got a build that really feels together. So, in today's video, I'm going to be going over that build. If that sounds interesting to you, then stick around. But also, I'm probably going to play another character after this, because I used Wingrave to farm a lot of materials. So, if you want to see what I play afterwards, be sure to get subscribed and ring the notification bell. And so without further ado, let's get into things. Alright, and here I have my Wingrave, who is Ascension 5 with an Ascension 5 weapon. There's still a long way to go, especially in terms of min-maxing echoes, but I feel pretty good about where my character's at. With that said, quick disclaimer. This is not fully optimized. These are just the choices I made, I'll get into a little bit of why, and it's what worked for me. If there's something you find that works better, please do let me know down in the comments below. With that said, first up, the armor. This is probably the most lacking part of my setup, because I don't have a lot of assets. So, the Biohazard Helm, because it had weapon power. My goal was to try to get as many bonuses to weapon power as possible, which, as you can see, has resulted in about 15k weapon power. I'm pretty happy with that number. Then I've got, max health crit power. Couldn't really find any weapon power stuff here. Crit rating is also a good one on the Tempered Bannerlord set. Then Lightbearer Pauldrons, max health weapon power. Health is really good for survivability, and it even gives you damage. Then here, ability power, weapon power. Would have preferred weapon power to be the primary, but it's pretty solid. And crit rating, crit power. This was mostly for the crit power, as I didn't think ability power was super helpful, although if you're lacking on Fizz defense, this Luminary Sash, great alternative. In terms of character building in general and what some of my goals were, the plan was to get a lot of weapon power since I am pretty much going for an auto attack build. After that, a little bit of crit, it increases damage. Break power to really cut through enemy break bars. That seemed super helpful, especially with the multi-hit from Windmother's Fang. And then enough defenses to not die. Which, this one's going to be a really tough one, because, for example, the magic defense is not very high here, as you can see. I find that I don't get hit by magic damage too much. If you find you're getting hit by a lot of magic damage and dying a lot, I recommend getting a lot more defenses. Because, to be honest with you, the crit stuff, probably not super relevant for build. I could easily see dropping all the crit rating and crit power, and funneling those stats into more defenses, more break power, or maybe even a little bit more health, though to be honest with you, it's going to be hard to get more weapon power or health as I'm already pretty heavily invested into it. So you're going to see a pretty similar theme here, weapon power and max health on all of my accessories. And so Circular Fervor, Ring of Fervor gives weapon power, break power, max health. The Master's Horn and Feather of War gives weapon power, max health, break power. These are the two sets that I was going for, Beastmaster and Soul's Adherent. Which one's better? Kind of just comes down to the rolls on your items. But personally, I found that because the Circlet of Further had resilience, I was better off going two-piece Master's Horn. Sadly, I do not have Fang of a Beast, otherwise I'd very much try to complete the three-piece here. As a note, if you need extra defenses, it is super easy to pick up defenses here, and to be honest with you, it's probably worth losing weapon power on at least one of your accessories, again, if you're struggling defensively. For potions, I'm going to be honest with you, I have these equipped, and I barely use them outside of a health flask, so, health flask. Then there's the Windmother's Fang. This is one of my favorite weapons because of a weapon ability Transcendence, a 3 to 5 hit combo. Generally speaking, you want to wait for full momentum to get the 5. It has a really good stat distribution here. Max health, pretty darn good. Weapon power, break power, all those fun stats. But it even has some phys defense, and I really do like having at least one defensive stat on a weapon. With that said, here are a couple of our weapons that I personally found to be very fun. Tooth and Claw. This is a sword and shield, so it's very much more in the defensive vein, but its weapon skill is Captain America. So if you want to be Captain America, go for it. The other weapon is Bloodsong. The Wheel of Pain gives you absurd heals. So, I really like this just for the Wheel of Pain. In terms of its stat distribution, it is definitely totally fine. You have a max health, you have weapon power, you have break power. Unfortunately, no defensive stats, so you might want to make that up somewhere else, such as on accessories. But the break power is also very, very generous. Next up, all this stuff down here. And so for talents, let's zoom out here. I went for Grim Devotion to gain bonus weapon power equal to 20% of max health. Basically, plus 1,000 or so weapon power from this alone. That's why I'm stacking weapon power and health in as many places as I can. The alternatives: Give No Ground, losing less stamina when blocking attacks, and Parry deals more damage. I didn't find Parry to be super helpful, and I'm not blocking a ton. And then Rallying Cry, healing allies. This is a very powerful support ability. But if you're playing solo, it is not super good, especially when this gives free damage. Then, filling out the rest of a tree, Hard Target. You now cause small amounts of damage to any enemy that hits you, basically thorns, and the damage scales of your Phys defense. So, the more Phys defense you have, the more this damage gets amplified. To be honest, while this is a nice bonus, you could very easily drop it for Presence of Mind, where every time you hit an enemy with a weapon attack, gain a stack of Mindful. You are primarily hitting enemies with weapon attacks. Then, using an ability, you get up to 30% bonus AP at 10 Mindful stacks. Bender's Unstoppable, using a weapon ability, increases Heat of Battle multiplier, that's the little combo meter, and you get up to 10 stacks. Then Waves of War for the additional charge speed, so that I can spam my abilities, mostly for healing purposes. Last, but certainly not least, Vengeance, to add an attack type echo slot. Now, in terms of alternatives, again, Presence of Mind is very good, and Fortifying Aura is quite strong. After using your ultimate, you gain a temporary bonus to all stats equal to 5% of your ability power. Even not really going out of my way for ability power, I've still got like 3.7k, so this would be a very nice all stats bonus. But it's a pretty significant point investment, so I didn't feel it was worth it. Then for abilities, I fully invested into Righteous Strike, mostly just to have really good on-demand healing, plus it was very easy to aim it. That said, you could easily stop at 2 out of 3 and put 1 point elsewhere. Next up, I maxed out Judgment. Not only does this reduce damage on bosses, but increases the amount healed. I very much think Judgment is a super good ability. Radiant Pulse, it's the shield. It's okay. If you're going for an AP build, it's probably pretty good for damage, but as an attack power build, as opposed to ability power build, I didn't really find too much use for this. Last up, Divine Aegis. Extending the duration by 50% is super OP. Honestly, must have. But you could take 1 point out of Righteous Strike, put it in here, go for the 2-2 split. That way, any incoming hits while you are invulnerable gives you bonus weapon power. I think that's a very strong bonus, and it's really helpful for dealing burst damage against bosses. Just be careful with the break build. If you break an enemy's bar, they're not going to hit you, thus you're not going to stack that bonus. The shield's nice, but I didn't find it super necessary, so that's why I didn't put 3 points here. Then for affinities, I ended up going with 25 into focus, 16 into discipline. This is mostly just to amp up that health as much as possible, while also getting the bonus weapon power here. And then weapon power, of course, in the discipline tree. That said, in terms of the perks, I do think that Crusader's Taunt might be a little bit better if you're in multiplayer, and going all the way into improved healing pulse, so 25 points into the instinct tree, is a lot better for solo survivability. That said, if you're going to go 25 into the instinct tree and split your remaining points here, then I would strongly recommend using different accessories, because you can kind of see the yellow, the green, and the purple. That corresponds to the affinity tree. So this would enhance the yellow perks, which gives break power, crit rating, and crit power, as opposed to things like ability power, phys defense, weapon power, weapon power, weapon power. But especially now, with being able to scale things up to your level, there's plenty of other accessories that you can choose. For artifacts, really all I have is the Nexus of Memories. It's plus 100 max health, which, you know what? Plus 100 max health is pretty good. Then last but certainly not least, Echoes. This is the part where, honestly, not only is it the most flexible, but I'm least sure of some of my choices. I kind of just went with what felt right. So, different Echo slots have different stats. I was primarily going for defenses in the defensive slots, things like shoring up my phys defense, as I found that phys defense got me killed a lot more than magic defense. And of course, max health, because max health is not only defenses and survivability, it is also damage. Then the weapon slot, weapon power, and then some break power, ideally both together, but sometimes, it's crit power, break power. You do what you can. Pretty straightforward. And then we have all of the boss echoes. So in my weapon, I have Azar Storm of Blades, which is triggered by dealing damage to whatever enemy last damaged you, and it causes physical damage equal to 300% of weapon power on a 12-second cooldown. My logic was, I am stacking absurd amounts of weapon power, so I want to scale off that, and short cooldowns are good. Plus, while I can dodge some things, I'm not good enough to dodge everything all the time, so I'm going to get hit, and there's a very good chance this is going to trigger. And there's Atarak the Deathless, which is a super OP effect. Causing physical damage, i.e. auto-attacking enemies, spawns a spectral axe that causes physical damage equal to 350% weapon power, 20-second cooldown. Really, really good. Triggers all the time. Also, that axe has a very nice AoE. Commander Creed, triggered by melee combo finishers, which I do tend to get a fair number of melee combo finishers. A large blast of damage equal to 125% weapon power. Not super impactful, but I have found it to be nice for the extra AoE in between my weapon specials. And then last up, but certainly not least, the newest effect that I have, which is Hollow Lord Vendrell, using a weapon ability while at least one Wayfinder ability is available. So basically just using a weapon ability. Damage from Wayfinder abilities cause a hollow hand to slam down up to 3 times, dealing 225% of weapon damage each time. So that's almost 700% of weapon damage on a 40-second cooldown. Very nice burst damage, quite long cooldown. Not 100% sold on this one. Might experiment with some other things, but so far it's been working pretty well. And as you can see from my echoes, some of them are enhanced, others are not. Some of them are low rarity. Recently, with the game opening things up so that you can farm pretty much all content and have your echoes scale up, have all your drops scale up, I definitely feel like there's some unexplored options here for echoes and accessories that, as I continue to play, I'll learn a little bit more about, at least if I stick to the Wingrave build. There's also a chance that I'm going to play another character after this. So, those are the choices I've made, and a few of my thoughts as to why I made them. But again, if you know of a super amazing OP Wingrave build, please do share it down below. My only request is I'm going to be keeping Windmother's Fang just because I really like how the weapon performs, and it's done all the content that I've put the build up against. But I did very much go into this game without any guides, just kind of playing it by feel, so I know a lot of my choices probably aren't super optimal. Alright, so now that I've talked about the gearing and choices that I made, let's get into a few gameplay things. In general, this is an auto-attack based character. You can use the heavy attacks, but I personally found it's a lot better to build up momentum as quickly as possible by using a barrage of light attacks rather than focusing on the heavies. After all, once you unleash that momentum, your skill's going to do far more damage than the heavy attacks would have. Though there are certain exceptions here, such as weaving in a heavy attack to finally finish off an enemy's break bar. In terms of abilities, it's pretty simple. Left is your Radiant Slash. This is your go-to heal, and it's a very good AoE slash semi-ranged ability. Down is your AoE taunt that lets you heal by hitting. So a combo that I like to do, taunt everything, then pop my momentum, which is left bumper plus right bumper, deals a whole bunch of hits, therefore gives me a whole bunch of heals. Up is a shield, protects against range attacks. Just be careful, it is a little bit finicky, especially if you get super close range to enemies. And right is your ultimate. Once it's charged up, use it in sticky situations, such as if you're about to fail a mechanic on the boss. Then speaking of, how does Wingrave do? Well, in terms of open world and story progression, the only times I really struggled were on main story bosses. But if, say, I'm going out in the world, I'm able to absolutely destroy enemies. I barely even need the healing effects because he has some passive healing. That's going to keep you going throughout most of the open world stuff, even through the Crucible zone. Then, when you start doing the endgame grind, or I guess just the grind, this is where things depend on the level of difficulty. If you're adding just one mutator, still super easy. At 2 mutators, you need to pay attention and play around the mechanics. At 3 mutators, that's where he can struggle a little bit, especially with a lot of the AoE ground effects, since he doesn't have too many long-range abilities with this setup. Though if you're more comfortable using a gun, then I could very much see that being a swap weapon that solves a lot of the problems. It's just that aiming the gun on controller feels really janky, so I try my best to avoid it. In terms of bosses and mythic hunts, Wingrave very much excels here. In fact, for a lot of the bosses and mythic hunts, I was able to do them when 500 power below the recommended. There are some, like Severe, where even now, if I mess up, I'm going to die. I'm not saying that it's always you can just face tank everything and not hit your abilities. No, you have to think about, okay, I can taunt, then heal with my momentum. Or I can unleash my Radiant Blade and clear those ads. Or I have invulnerability and I can just sit there and put damage into the boss. Timing your momentum is also really good for any of the encounters that you need to burst something down really quick. Build it up on the boss beforehand, then unleash it to do absolutely massive damage and, very likely, break the enemy's break bar, temporarily disabling them. So in short, I think Wingrave provides a very easy entry point into the world of Wayfinder, and a very good first-time experience. But he's not perfect. And I do feel like, in comparison to the other characters, his ceiling is a bit lower. So, for example, on Senja or Kairos, you'll get more damage if you're able to skillfully play around how their kits work. Or Venomous with her crazy healing and very high damage output. But all of these characters are quite a bit harder to play. So while I might explore them in a future video, and I'm definitely going to play around with them now that I feel like I've kind of maxed out / finished Wingrave, if you're just looking for something easy that gets you into the game that you can potentially use to farm materials to get yourself into the other characters, then, especially in comparison to Silo and Nis, the other 2 starting characters, Wingrave very much is the easy entry point here. He'll start with a sword and shield, but you can swap it to a 2-hander pretty darn quickly, and then cycle through other weapons until you're able to buy the Wind Mothers. And so that's been how I set my Wingrave up, and some of my experiences playing him. But I'm also curious about your experiences, so feel free to share them down below. Oh, and by the way, you made it to the end of the video, you probably liked it, so leave a like while you're down there. With that said, if you're looking for something else to watch, maybe on a point of comparison as to where I started and where I've ended up, check out one of my earlier videos on Wayfinder. It'll be linked up in the card down in the description, where I go over some of my first impressions, and I give a high-level overview of all the characters minus the new one that came with 1.0. Now with that said, I know I just finished talking about how Wingrave has a ceiling. Here's the thing. This is a single-player game. You don't have to rush to endgame and then start the grind to get the best gear possible. If you're having fun with Wingrave, something that I very much did playing him, then just keep playing him. Don't worry about the ceiling. I think there are a couple of secret bosses that I've heard people talk about, but I haven't encountered yet, which I've probably missed somehow. But aside of that, I've taken him through all the content available to me, both through the story and the mythic hunts, and doing some 3 mutator runs, and I've succeeded at all of it. Which is to say, Wingrave is a very strong character, he feels great to play, and hey, if you want to be a support, he is adept at that if you're playing in the multiplayer. So with that, thanks for watching to the end, I'm glad you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.